Welcome or welcome back to the first in a series of videos about definition and openness and conditioning and deconditioning according to human design. This is a huge topic. There's lots to talk about. So I hope that as we dive in that you're going to come with an open heart, an open mind, and some curiosity. Okay, let's go. So aside from human design, we know that we are conditioned by culture, as represented typically by our families of origin, our early communities, our schools, sports, different organizations or groups we've been a part of, and all of that, right? Is that when we're young people, we are conditioned by our environment. We're conditioned by the things that are around us. We come in, we're looking around, and we're kind of like, wow, okay, what's this culture about? What are those sounds that people are making? How are they moving? What are they doing? And we do our best to model what's going on around us, right? And I'm sure you've heard, right, before about age 7, we are really sponges, right? We don't have a lot of filters. We don't have a lot of cognitive awareness. So we're really taking in and often replicating what it is that we see around us. And so this is how we get conditioned or programmed as young people. So the programs, many of them are actually super helpful. Learning how to walk, learning how to talk, learning how to eat, learning how to pick up after yourself. You know, as you get older, learning how to drive a car or ride a bike and all of those things. Those are all programs that we learn through practice. We get taught or we explore ourselves and we develop a program and it gets set into the subconscious and then it kind of carries it out without us having to think about it, right? If you think about riding a bike, you don't have to think about riding a bike after you learn how to do it, or driving a car. You don't have to learn how to do that. You don't have to learn how to walk all the time unless you have some kind of injury and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my goodness, I have to learn how to do that again. So there's a lot of things that we learn that are programs that get set into the subconscious that continue to carry out their programs for a long time. And it's awesome, right? Because we don't want to have to relearn all that stuff. But then there are other programs that we tend to call conditioning that we think are maybe not so great. Many times when we're young people, we create survival strategies because we're in environments where we're trying to figure out what's going on. Sometimes it can be confusing. Sometimes it can be traumatizing. Sometimes we're just trying to, get along and be a part of things, right? That's what we're trying to do. And if we're in an environment where we have, self-absorbed parents or a narcissistic person in our life who's really central, especially if they're a parent, we will mold ourselves to try to get along, to try to have things work out for everyone. So people pleasing, right, or being a peacemaker is a very common program that people develop for themselves when they have self-absorbed parents or narcissistic parents, or there's a lot of codependence, right? Or if you grew up with somebody who's like a rageaholic or somebody who's controlling, you want to keep the peace because it just feels better, right? And so when you're a young person and you don't have a lot of choices about, where you live and what you're doing and all that, right? You create these strategies. As you grow up, they may not be so great when you're older, right? Really smart when you're young. But unless you actually dismantle them as you get older, you continue to carry out these programs or this conditioning into adulthood. This is material that you have already thought about before, you already know about. So with human design, traditional human design actually says that there's some kind of authentic self. And it locates that authentic self in the definition of our charts, our type, our strategy, our authority, our profile in particular, but also just the definition of the gates and the channels and the centers. And so one of our tasks according to human design is to strip away the conditioning that prevents us from living as this authentic self, right? Now, my take on it is it's a little more complicated than that because Yes, there may be some core essence. I tend to think of it as a soul essence, really, a soul essence to us. And yes, human design can help us to discover that. And so that can be really valuable. At the same time, we also create who we are. We also construct who we are. It's not something that's just there, that's set, that we need to discover. It's also that we do well when we look at, well, what have my choices been? What decisions have I made? Where did I decide to go? What kind of experiences did I invest in? And then how did I respond to them? What did I grow inside myself as that happened? What capacities have I developed? Because for me, all of those things that arise out of life experience are absolutely a part of who you are. Do you want to call it your authentic self? I think so. It's authentic to you, meaning you authorized it, you authored it, and you authorized it, which is what authentic means. And so author even means something that we've created, right? So we have authored ourselves. I don't think that's really what people mean when they say the authentic. They're trying to get at some kind of soul essence, I think. And so, you might want to just play around with that for yourself, decide what you think about it. But I tend to really talk more about soul essence and how certain parts of our design can show us those pieces. But I do think that the ways that we've created ourselves, constructed ourselves, built our capacities, made choices, decided to put some things aside and decided to amplify and grow in other things, all of that to me is part of our authentic self as well. So we want to kind of look at those pieces. And as we go through this series, we're going to be diving into more details about all of this. There's a lot of content that can be focused on by looking at openness and definition. And so I'm excited to be sharing that with you. So diving into this, understand that I come from a personal development or a coaching or mentoring background. And because of that, I have a developmental outlook to life. I see us as continually growing and evolving beings. And so that's how I see like our definition and what we might call our authentic self in human design. I don't see it as a static thing. I see it as growing and developing all the time. And yes, we are programmed, and yes, we are conditioned when we're young, but we also have choice about how to relate to all of that. Now, side note here, Ra, the founder of Human Design, was known to wear a hat called No Choice. So he had a different perspective than I do. And he didn't come out of a personal development or coaching background. That wasn't what was his come from. Okay. So that's fine. We all have different contributions that we can make. And I always bow to Ra and, have a lot of respect and honor for him for having brought through this system. And we're also continually evolving it as well. So for me, we absolutely have choice. We always have choice. And even if it's a choice about how we just respond on the inside to something that's happening, I'm a big believer in choice. So I would never say you have no choice. It's like not part of how I see things. And so when we're adults, one of the opportunities that we have that's really important is for us to become aware of the programs that are running inside of us and to decide, do we want to keep them? Oh, I like riding a bike. I like brushing my teeth before bed. I like driving a car. I like knowing how to walk. Those are all programs that I want to keep. Are there ones that I want to update, right? Because there may be things where you're like, part of that really works for me, but part of it doesn't. And so I'm going to update it. My mother always said I needed to do things in such and such a way. And I don't want to do it just the way my mom did it, right? Even though I've been doing it that way for a while now. I don't want to do it. I want to do it my own way. But you know what? She had a lot of really great things to offer. So I'm going to keep some of that and then I'm going to make it my own. Okay. And then it's through repetition that it becomes a new program and it gets set into the subconscious. So we just kind of do it automatically. Okay. And then there's other ones we want to look at and we go, I don't want to do that at all anymore. I learned how to do that because, my older brother was kind of abusive to me as a kid. And so I learned how to hide whenever I was scared. You don't want to carry out that program. into adulthood. You don't want to feel like you need to leave a situation as soon as you feel scared at all, right? You don't want to run away, whether that's physically or energetically. You want to be able to stand and be like, okay, something is kind of scary right now. I'm going to stand. I'm going to have awareness about it. I'm going to ground myself. I'm going to lean into my heart, and I'm going to use all of my resources, and I'm going to be okay. Is there something I'm really afraid of? Do I need to pay attention to that, or is there just something that's showing up for me where a program gets going and I don't want to do that anymore? I'm not going to hide, I'm not going to do that. So those are some ways that you might respond once you identify a program that you see is running in you. I'll give you a really simple example that actually has a lot of implications. A program that was instilled in me as a young person was to always eat every bite that was on my plate. My parents grew up during the Depression, and it was like a thing in my family, is you eat everything that's on your plate. I carried out that program for a long time. And then I started to realize, do I really need to do that? Like, it makes me overeat a lot. And then I thought, okay, I don't want to overeat anymore. So I'm going to change that. So the first thing was, I'm going to stop when I'm full. Okay, I'm not going to keep eating when I'm full. So that changed the program. It's like, okay, let me notice when I'm full. Let me just change that. And so that was the first step, right? And I trained myself, created a new program to be able to tell when I was full so I could stop eating. And then I realized, I could actually put less on my plate. I could take smaller portions, and that would lead me to probably eat the right amount. And if I needed some more, I could go get some more. But it gives me more options, and I'm not staring at this big plate of food. I'm like picking out a smaller portion, and I'm going to see what that's like. That's creating a new program. I'm going to eat smaller portions, right? And so that's a simple example, but it is something that's actually made a big difference for me, because I used to habitually overeat, because it was kind of what I was trained to do. So you can think for yourself in your life, what are some things that you've been habitually trained to do that are now programs that you carry out, and you get to see for yourself, okay, is that one helpful or not? Now, human design is super helpful for helping us to identify programs and conditioning that we have, so that we can have more awareness. Because human design is a countercultural system. It thinks different. It kind of is individual circuitry, but it thinks different. It's radical. It has very different points of view. So as we start taking it in, it can show us. So for example, if we go back to that people pleaser or that peacemaker we were talking about earlier, many times people who have an open emotional solar plexus, right? Which means that they pick up emotional energy and amplify it of other people. People who have that configuration, I happen to have that configuration, tend to become people pleasers. That's one of the ways that they tend to go, because it's uncomfortable when you're in an environment and there's emotional energy, and that energy isn't so great. Like if it's rageful or griefful or shaming or whatever, and you pick it up and you amplify it, and you're like, that doesn't feel good to me at all. So what do? You're like, want to keep everything calm. You want to quiet things down. Now, it's not guaranteed that the emotionally open person is going to go in that direction. They could also become avoidant. They could also be like, I'm just out of here. Like I was talking about before, like I'm going to hide if I'm scared, right? It's like, I'm just out of here. I'm just going to leave. I'm going to leave energetically. I'm going to leave physically, whatever. I'm just like not going to be here. That's another way that we might respond to the experience of having an open emotional solar plexus. Now, there are other parts in the chart that also could lead us to have that kind of behavior and that kind of attitude. So that is not the only place. But that's an example of some conditioning or programming we could have in a pretty common place that gets talked about in human design. Now, the thing is human design does not show us how we need to decondition. It can show us, like when I do a reading for people, I often will look to say, do they have an open emotional solar plexus? And then I'll ask some questions about that, because I know that that's common for people. But it doesn't show me how to help that person decondition from being a people pleaser. Okay. Ra said that we start to decondition kind of automatically once we learn about our design, and it takes about 7 years. I think some of this may be true. I think sometimes when I've done readings with people and they get information about their design, I can see like this, oh, wow, I never knew that about myself, or I never thought about that about myself, or that really affirms this thing about myself that, people around me don't really understand. So that can be true to an extent. But my experience is that a lot of people need more support in order to decondition. Just learning their design on its own is not enough to change them. It's like we have to apply what we learn in order for us to really change. So I teach Kundalini yoga practices both in my YouTube channel and also in the Becoming Sovereign Quantum Retreat Center and with clients and in programs, because it's one of the core ways that I help people learn how to decondition. I marry that with human design, and there's other human design experts who do that as well. And, that's because, again, human design doesn't teach us how to change that energy. It shows us what the energy is, but it doesn't necessarily show us how to do that. I'm going to be sharing some unusual views in this series, and you may end up feeling I'm a little bit of a human design heretic. It's okay with me. I have a predominance of individual circuitry, and I tend to think different, and I'm here to bring change. So I'm good with that. I'm going with that. I'm just going to ask you to be open-minded and curious, like I said at the beginning, so that you might be able to take some of this in as we go along, because some of it's going to be different than probably what you've been taught before. And one big aspect of this, and I'll end with this for today, is the assertion, as Ra says. I just was reading it on the Jovian archive today. He was saying that we are utterly vulnerable in the open parts of our chart, particularly in centers that don't have any gates defined. We're utterly vulnerable, right? We are at the mercy of outside forces in those parts of our chart. And I just don't think it's that simple. And I don't think that there's nothing we can do about it. In fact, this is why I do the energy practices that I do, is my purpose is to help people have more command over all of their energy field, including their openness. And I think that there are very practical things that you can do that give you that kind of command. Okay. And for me, sovereignty requires us to be able to take more command of our field. So yes, human design is a hugely wise tool and an elegant living consciousness that is helping us to do that. And marrying it with other kinds of energy practices that help us to understand and know how to build our pranic field, know how to clear out other people's energies, human-made frequencies, the residue from solar flares, whatever, just all the things that can come in and impact us. We want to build more command of our field. And human design helps us do that in certain ways. It gives us this map for us to understand ourselves better, but we also need other practices. So we'll be diving into all of this much more during this series. And the comment question for today's video, I hope you're going to answer down below, is what is an experience that you've had with some open aspect of your chart? And what did that mean for you? Right? What happened with some part of your openness, and how do you understand it? How did you come to understand yourself a little bit better by learning that about that open part of your chart? I'm excited to hear from you. This is going to help us to crowdsource some wisdom for all of us. All right, that's for today's video. Many blessings, much love. Bye for now.